This is a tale from long ago. It's the tale of the first settlers of this land. In the beginning, the people followed the spirits of good, and all was peaceful. But that era of peace soon came to an end. The evil Demon King rose to power, destroying everything in his path. The spirits of good had no choice but to face him in battle. The war that ensued seemed to last an eternity, and much blood was shed. Finally, the spirits subdued the Demon King, though they could not destroy him. Their powers were greatly depleted. With their remaining power, they buried the Demon King's spirit in the ground. They built shackles to imprison him, and a tower that acted as a lock. These shackles cover the land to this day. With their power drained, the spirits of good returned to the heavens. Suddenly bereft of both demons and spirits, this land was entrusted to us. The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks was released for the Nintendo DS in December of 2009. It is considered the 15th official Zelda title, the 7th handheld Zelda title, and the 3rd and so far last Zelda title in what's considered the Wind Waker storyline. The story has you playing as Link, a young aspiring train engineer, which is a kingdom-granted title like that of a knight. On the day he's set to receive his engineering certificate, Link finds himself in a secret meeting with Princess Zelda. It seems that the Spirit Tracks, the magical have-always-been-there rails that the Kingdom of New Hyrule has been running its trains on, have been gradually disappearing, and Zelda wants Link to sneak her out of the castle and take her to the Tower of Spirits, the center point from which the Spirit Tracks flow out of. However, on the way there, the tracks underneath Link's train vanishes, and the Tower of Spirits shatters. They are then attacked by Chancellor Cole, one of Zelda's advisors and secretly a demon, and the claw-armed bird. Cole ends up ripping Zelda's soul from her body, with the intent to use her body as a vessel for the long-imprisoned Demon King, Malladus. Link and Zelda, now a floating spirit that only Link can see, make it to what remains of the tower to find Anjean, one of the Locomos, servants of the Spirits of Good. She tests them with finding ancient rail maps, restoring the tower's connection to various temples across the land. Once the Tower of Spirits and the Spirit Tracks are restored, they'll need to find the Bow of Light and use it to cast Malladus from Zelda's body. What follows is your typical Zelda formula. You traverse a dungeon, solving puzzles, fighting enemies, you find a special item that gives you new ways to traverse space, you fight a boss utilizing that item, and receive a reward. What's unique to this game is its use of trains to move around the overworld. You can't freely traverse the space of New Hyrule. You have to take the predetermined paths of the Spirit Tracks, which on one hand diminishes the oft-praised exploratory aspect of the series, but on the other hand makes travel a more in-depth affair. You have to plot your routes, balance how fast you want to get somewhere with how likely you are to run into certain enemies. You can also activate and utilize certain portals to get around the world quickly. As the game progresses, you get the option of transporting passengers and moving cargo, which adds more complexities to the process. Passengers have to be kept happy, which means knowing the rules of the rails, when to slow down and when to speed up, when to toot your horn, and how to successfully slow down to a stop at the requested station. Cargo can be destroyed by enemy attacks or reckless driving, and sometimes will ruin with time, meaning they have to be transported quickly. These tasks can result in opening up new routes and areas, including an entire optional dungeon. Throughout the game, you collect various treasures, jewelry, fossils, coins, which can then be turned in for new train cars. This sometimes lets you improve the durability of your train, but for the most part these are cosmetic changes. You can't improve speed or braking or the damage of your onboard cannon. Okay, so this is not exactly a train simulator, or at the very least it's baby's first train simulator, but it's the process of getting from point A to point B that's interesting. This is in keeping with the rest of what I will call the Wind Waker trilogy, consisting of Wind Waker, Natch, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks. Massive, barren overworlds with tiny points of interest and plot, where the management of traversing across it is the central mechanic. Even if it wasn't fun, the music that plays during train rides is one of my all-time favorite pieces of video game music, and I'm pretty sure they included the horn just so you could toot along. Now, the question on the mind might be, do trains really fit in with The Legend of Zelda? Zelda is a franchise that typically borrows and evolves its iconography from medieval fantasy, swords and sorcery and dragons and such. Granted, that iconography has been made very unique by many creative minds behind these games, filtered through the lens of Japanese creators and later built up as its own mythology, but a lot of Zelda derives from Arthurian legend and Grimm's fairy tales, which don't contain much in the way of steam engines. That's not to say that fantasy and trains are incompatible, hello Hogwarts Express, but despite the franchise never taking place on Earth, and therefore not bound to Earth calendars, we instinctively perceive Zelda games as stories that happened in a distant past. And while the locomotive, as we recognize it, is a little over 200 years old, it's hard to consider any time period you can find photos of as distant past. But of course, we have legends about trains. We have folklore and stories and songs about working on the railroad. Some are based on real events, such as the tale of Casey Jones, the heroic railroad engineer of the Cannonball, who always got the trains in on time. Some are entirely fiction, like the tale of John Henry, a steel-driving man who contested a steam-powered hammer in a race, one of the first man versus machine tales. There are tales of hauntings, like the phantom funeral train that rides on the anniversary of the death of Abraham Lincoln. Trains are a fascinating means of transportation. People build rail models in their basements. There are YouTube channels dedicated to footage of train rides. There are children's shows where trains have faces and can talk. And where there's fascination, there's imagination. And I think the greater question is, why can't there be trains in Zelda? I, for one, happen to like the implications of trains in this game. First off, what happened here was a bunch of pirates and a Peter Pan cosplayer washed up on a land where a previous civilization had created miles-long chains meant to imprison the king of demons. And they said, not only are we going to settle here, we're going to build a public transit system off of these things we know nothing about. Imagine if you discovered the fossilized remains of a Lovecraftian nightmare with thousands of hollow tentacles running through miles of Earth, and you end up going, hey, let's convert whatever this is into a sanitary sewer. The I don't care about past civilizations thing continues into the treasure mechanic. You find these artifacts of past people, and you don't preserve them, you don't study them, you don't bring them to a museum. Instead, you liquidize them and convert them into locomotive parts. Sorry, crown of the long-extinct Zora race, but I need to add a steel body to my steam engine. It's not a heavy-handed anti-colonialist message. At the end of the day, the people of New Hyrule aren't hurting anything by using the spirit tracks for their trains. If anything, the game is celebratory of building new things on the old, of an old civilization being the foundation for a new one. Link and Zelda, both children, are tasked with both restoring the foundation and seeking a new, bright future for New Hyrule. Maladius represents sins of the past that must be dealt with before the next generation can proceed to a bright future. And what better way to represent a future of forward progress than Zelda's Industrial Revolution? A squeaky clean for kids' Industrial Revolution, sure, but an Industrial Revolution all the same. This incarnation of Link is not a prophesized hero. He's not a chosen warrior. He's an engineer with the learned skills to get the job done. This is the only time you could really describe Link as a blue-collar hero. This, I think, is the core reason why people are hesitant about the idea of trains in Zelda, because they suggest continuous change within the setting. They show a forward progression in technology and society that no other Zelda game suggests. Zelda stories tend to end with things brought to a status quo. There is an evil corruption, Link steps in to destroy it, and things revert back to how they should have been. In A Link to the Past, Link saves the day so hard that characters come back to life. In Ocarina of Time, Link's use of time travel means the evil never did its thing in the first place. If something does change, it's a change towards the familiar. Skyward Sword ends with Link and Zelda creating the status quo of virtually every other Zelda game. The Wind Waker trilogy feels like an outlier here. Wind Waker itself ends with the typical Zelda status quo destroyed by a biblical flood, and our young protagonist tasked with finding a new society, to learn from the mistakes of old Hyrule and create a new hope for the world. Spirit Tracks, the second sequel to Wind Waker, is basically the series making good on that promise. They have found their new hope, and it is not another gambit of Ganons and Triforces. It's industry. Spirit Tracks goes through the typical rigmarole of fighting a corrupting force by clearing dungeons and finding artifacts, but the result is not the kingdom restored to its former glory. It's the kingdom being able to progress forward without obstacle. Malladus must be defeated so that we can have shipping lanes, and later down the line, factories and power plants and automobiles and skyscrapers and computers and spacecraft. When we talk about The Legend of Zelda, we tend to focus on the Zelda part, the immediate present tense adventure we are participating in as a video game. But there's another big word in there: legend. Dictionary.com defines legend as a non-historical or unverifiable story handed down by tradition from earlier times and popularly accepted as historical. Each game since 1986 frames itself as a fable from long ago, a story being told to the audience in the format of a video game, in the same way one might tell it around a campfire. This is evoked quite literally in Spirit Tracks, which opens with a storyteller character explaining the history of the Spirit Tracks to Link as a legend, and we learned he intends to present, or rather perform, this legend to the rest of the community. It's oral history, and if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I love me some oral history. In the original Legend of Zelda, the game world had a lot of obtuse secrets. Things like walls you had to bomb with no visual signifier that you could. This was not the game designers being lazy, but a world design made specifically to promote communication between different players. You were supposed to explore this world, discover a secret, go to your buddy and say, "Hey, did you know about such and such?" And they'd be all, "What? No way!" In the days before the internet and published strategy guides, you had to talk about the game like you would talk about a legend. "Hey, did you know about King Arthur's sister Sangiv?" "What? No way! I thought her name was Anna." Deep cut for the Arthurian scholars out there. That style of conversational gameplay didn't translate down the line. It's not like everyone had a buddy with a Nintendo and sometimes a kid just wants to beat the frickin' game. And instead the conversation became about The Legend of Zelda's increasingly complex and contradictory internal mythology. The first real wrench in the works came with the third Zelda game, A Link to the Past, which is set before the events of the first two Zelda games and sort of plays out the backstory seen in Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. In Zelda 2's backstory, a crafty wizard who is either working for Ganon or is Ganon in disguise manipulates the royal family of Hyrule, the High King dies, and Princess Zelda is put into jeopardy. In A Link to the Past, a crafty wizard who is either working for Ganon or is Ganon in disguise manipulates the royal family of Hyrule, the High King dies, and Princess Zelda is put into jeopardy. The broad strokes are the same, but when you get to the actual details, these are clearly two different stories. In Zelda 2, Zelda is put into a deep, ageless sleep. In A Link to the Past, she's just thrown in the castle dungeon. Zelda 2's jealous prince is a no-show, and there isn't a Link in the Zelda 2 backstory because the idea of there being multiple Links over generations hadn't really been developed yet. The easy answer here is to just say that Zelda 2's backstory and the story of A Link to the Past are just different events that hit similar beats. But if that's the case, that means the Kingdom of Hyrule had a known history of just trusting evil wizards sight unseen, not helped when it happens a third time in Ocarina of Time, which takes place before A Link to the Past. This time the evil wizard is specifically Ganon, or Ganondorf, but the royal family ends up screwed all the same. Ocarina of Time, in turn, feels like a broad strokes retelling of A Link to the Past, with the hero Link transporting between two realities, having to save 7 individuals who can help seal away the evil Ganon, and there's even an ocarina involved. In A Link to the Past, the 7 individuals, the 7 maidens, are the descendants of the first group of 7 individuals to seal away Ganon, the 7 wise men. Some have argued that the 7 sages from Ocarina of Time are the same as the 7 wise men, except for the whole, 5 of the sages being women and all of them being different species. Again, if you want, you can chalk up the 7 wise men thing as being a separate event left undocumented by video games. And again, that just stresses Hyrule's inability to recognize patterns. But this is only a problem if this were the history of Zelda. It's the Legend of Zelda, singular. One that takes what came before, changes and updates what it feels it needs to, and tells it all afresh. A growing, evolving narrative. There's only the vaguest sense of continuity between these iterations that we cling to, which brings us to the infamous Zelda timeline. If you haven't guessed by now, I'm not a fan. The idea of stitching all these games together as if they were one large story hasn't produced anything of value besides some really geeky forum debates. For one, the fact that you need a 3-way timeline resulting from Ocarina of Time's time travel mechanic in order for this to work at all shows that these games were not designed as some great overarching narrative. And one of those timelines is Link loses. Why don't every other game have a Link loses branch? To have a stingent continuity like this would suggest that the games provide an ongoing narrative, and while later entries have made attempts to be origin stories of reoccurring elements among the games, it doesn't come off as some grand payoff. At best, they're nodding references to the hardcore fanbase, and there's still contradictions and redundancies. For example, why are there so many princesses named Zelda in this franchise? Well, according to the Adventure of Link, when the evil wizard put a Princess Zelda into a magical coma, the prince made it the rule of law that all princesses born to the royal family would be named Zelda. In Skyward Sword, it's because the first Zelda was the reincarnation of the goddess Hylia, and it became a naming tradition. Now, these aren't technically contradictory. You could say that the prince just made the tradition law, but they are two redundant origin stories to explain away Nintendo's need to keep Zelda relevant as a brand name. An ongoing history doesn't need both stories as they result in the same conclusion. That's because the people behind these games are not considering them as an ongoing history. The Legend of Zelda is a reoccurring story archetype that is constantly evolving and retelling itself in many, many ways. The few times there are direct sequels to specific Zelda stories, they're usually side stories taking place in weird, distant lands removed from the conflicts of the original game. Koholint Island in Link's Awakening, Termina in Majora's Mask, and yes, New Hyrule in Spirit Tracks. Nintendo never really cared about any timeline until they found a way to sell it back to the fans who were debating it. They still don't really care, as evident by the latest game, Legend of Zelda Sexy Link Dress Up, which doesn't fit easily into any of the 3 timeline branches that the company supposedly endorses. Nintendo's priorities have always been in making good, standalone video games with stories that echo each other, both for brand recognition and for building a language of myth that can expand and evolve while still feeling like it's part of the same series as the 1986 original. You're free to disagree, but I prefer it that way. It means your Legend of Zelda is as valid as their Legend of Zelda. No continuity, just recurrence. But again, there is one major exception to all of this, and that's the Wind Waker trilogy. Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks have a direct linear continuity with each other that the rest of the series eschews, with Spirit Tracks being a logical endpoint to the narrative started in Wind Waker. These games aren't completely devoid from tradition, they're still puzzle-solving, dungeon-crawling games, they still have a Link and a Zelda, but they are outliers by being a trilogy that, while certainly each individual game is understandable and playable on its own, are enriched by being in direct continuity with each other. The overall Zelda timeline is nonsense, because if the rest of the games were in continuity, they would resemble this, a larger story about progress in the face of conflict, journeys that have consequences, and worlds that evolve and advance. On top of everything else we've discussed, The reason trains feel weird in Zelda is because they symbolize a progression of time that the franchise has rarely adhered to, despite the geeky forum debates and Nintendo licensed books. It's not that trains don't belong, it's that they're overdue. Spirit Tracks is fun. I wouldn't call it an all-time classic, but I enjoyed my time with it. A moderate amount of content, a cute art style, and some truly wonderful music make it a perfect lazy summer day game to enjoy out on a hammock. And its place at the end of Zelda's only proper trilogy makes it worth contemplating as part of the larger Zelda narrative. It's deceptively interesting, and I love that.